Because the other crazy insight that we found is that people tend to only have, on average in the US, 3 social media apps on their phone because they feel an obligation to contribute to the social media quote unquote community, whether it's like posts or whether it's adding pictures or whether it's like, dropping tweets or whatever it might be. But when it came to entertainment apps, as long as people were feeling entertained, they were happy to download more apps. So it also created this opportunity for us to compete in a place that had more white space and also had higher engagement times, because people will spend upwards of 3 to 4 hours a day on entertainment, but only like 30 to 60 minutes on social media.
Sam, so nice to see you. How's it going?
It's going great, Avery. We have a big packed show today. I want to get right into it. So first off, give us 2 minutes on CES. What was it like?
For one, it was an amazing week at CES. I was only there for 36 hours, but it was super action-packed. I had Gary for a day, and the brief was, let's have the most productive 12 hours possible. So we did that. That was actually on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, we did a really cool, event with our friends at Ipsos, did some cool research. There were a lot of brands at CES. There was a lot of interesting tech as well. Got to walk the floor. There was the usual AI conversation, the usual stuff on hardware. Nothing that totally blew my mind. It felt like some repackaged stuff we've seen before, but it felt like a lot of media people were there in a big way this year. And of course, I'd be remiss to not call out the fact that the tone and tenor just really changed of CES by the end of the day Wednesday with what, the tragedy that's happened with the LA fires. A lot of people flying home, and, my heart is so out to our people in LA, our team, our clients, friends. I think that really shifted things for a lot of people this week and also puts things into perspective.
Yes, absolutely. The LA disaster is so big. I can't even wrap my head around it. I wonder even what LA looks like for the next 10 years after this. So yeah, also sending love out to all of our people out there. Okay, so that's the CES bit. Thank you. No blown mind technology to report. No. More of the same, but it sounds like brands are coming back, because there was a couple of years that CES was taking a dip, but it seems like it's back on the upswing.
It did. It really felt like it was back on the upswing. A lot of CMOs there this year, which I feel like they typically don't come. Maybe it's because they pushed it back a week, which is very smart of CES. People need a little, ease into the next new year.
Amazing. Okay. The other thing I want to get your take on is, this week we saw Meta doing away with its fact-checking division, wants to rely more on community notes. A lot of people are sort of saying it's them just like sucking up to the new Trump administration.
Totally.
Yeah. What's your take as someone who places a lot of media on Facebook properties, both organic and paid? How do you look at that, and does that worry you?
Nothing worries me. Change is the only constant. Meta has been a fantastic partner, and Mark Zuckerberg is a proven business assassin. The Absolutely. Man is a business machine. People have tried to bet against them many, many times. Many will remember that actually the current policy on content moderation was sort of appeasing the prior administration. That was something that they really wanted due to some of the false information that was spreading across and influencing things like elections. Mark's piece, and he talks about how the fact checking is actually creating more problems than it's solving. That is Meta's line in the sand, and we need to fully unpack exactly what they mean by that. But you're exactly right. It'll be moving to more of a community fact checking, which is the model that X has. Many are nervous about that. Many brands are nervous about that. And it's timed right around putting Dana White on the board as well, which is a close ally of Trump. So many are interpreting this as a way to ensure that Meta is friendly with the new administration. Seems to be serendipitous timing.
I keep wondering if this is the best outcome for AI. Like that if AI was an entity, this is exactly what they wanted, because things like community notes, things like utilizing the sort of reactions and virality to decide if we're going to take an action are the things, frankly, that AI can game really well, especially coming out of a content AI farm in somewhere in Russia or whatever it may be. I'm wary of it. I totally agree. I think there's almost no one who performs at the level of Mark Zuckerberg on these things. I think he is so good at it and what he does. I would never bet against that. But I do wonder if it's good for humanity, and I'm starting to think it probably isn't. But here we are, 2025.
Here we are in Meta. I will say that they changed things a lot, right? Like, so they added this policy. Now they have this one. In 3 to 4 years, are they going to have a different policy? Very likely. But I will say that we are doing, a lot of client communication, a lot of contingency planning, because
Yeah.
this is happening at the same time as the potential TikTok ban.
Yeah.
So it's all kind of happening. It's all happening at once. Sam, I cannot wait to get our guest on. We have the
Let's
one and
do
only
it.
Nick Tran, who has had an illustrious career at brands like Yum, at Hulu, at Samsung, at TikTok, and many others. Nick is like the CMO. So I'm really pumped that we have him on the show.
Yep. We got Nick. Nick was a 40 under 40 from Fortune. He was one of Forbes' most influential CMOs. This is a guy who knows marketing better than most. So right after the break, we'll be back with Nick Tran.
We all want to believe in something. In Chinese, belief also means trust. We want to trust our systems and each other to explore new frontiers and build a future beyond what we know. For the past 10 years at Consensus, pioneers, builders, and dreamers have gathered together to create a new financial system where everyone has value. Join us at Consensus Hong Kong, where belief becomes real.
Nick Tran, it is so wonderful to see you. Thank you for joining us on Gen C.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
We have been trying to get you on the podcast in several different roles and capacities. So I'm really excited that today is the day we're making it happen. So let's just start off with the basics. Tell us a little bit about Nick Tran. Give us the brief bio of your career in marketing, your career in culture, and kind of what got you here today.
Sure. It's probably much easier to get me since I'm actually not working right now. So that's a plus.
It won't last long.
Yeah. So I am a marketer by trade. I've been in marketing my entire career. I was fortunate enough to get into the social media space very early when I first was an intern at Taco Bell. After an amazing run at Taco Bell and helping to navigate the brand through, a crisis with the claims of not using real beef, to launching Doritos Locos Tacos, to doing all these like fun stunts across social, this person who's interviewing me asked me, was it the work that we were doing that made the brand cool, or was it because we were in a lucky, spot and the brand was just inherently cool and needed to have like a little bit of a catalyst? And I couldn't objectively answer that. So I committed to myself to spend my career learning about marketing and trying to figure out what it is that moves brands, makes them relevant in culture, and drives, sales for them. With the hope that one day I can go teach that in a classroom. So from Taco Bell, I went to Stance, which is a company that at the time no one had heard about, realized that the same playbook applied. Then I went to Samsung, which is a much different company from Stance, and then also realized that same playbook applied. Go to Hulu right before the Disney acquisition. Turns out, same playbook applied. And it wasn't until I got to TikTok where I was leading marketing, and in the midst of the realization that TikTok was fundamentally changing the way that people consume and engage with content, that was the first moment that I realized that the playbook that I had, studied for my entire career, and it was battle tested and tried and true, it wasn't going to work. So we really had to flip the playbook around, navigate what it means to be in culture, rethink the way that we used content as the driver versus like the media buy as the driver. And obviously has seen so much success for brands that are on TikTok and TikTok itself. And then was able to take some time off and travel the world with my family. And now I'm in London.
Amazing. Nick, my question for you to kick us off, I want it, and it's obviously provocative in nature, but really is this idea of like, the current state of brand marketing seems in flux. It does feel like a lot of brands don't know what they're doing right now, like between all of the different things happening. So like, how are you feeling? You post a lot on LinkedIn. You're a great follow for LinkedIn. But I do, and I think you highlight what is often the best in marketing happening, both like older and newer. But like, what's your take on the current state of brand marketing in general?
I think that's a really good question. I haven't given it deep thought, but marketing in general has to change. I think the way that people look at content has changed. So the way that you deliver that has to be different. But beyond just the delivery of it all, I think we're at this interesting crossroads with brand marketing specifically, because when I was in school for marketing and when I was early in my career, the premise was if you're a company that has a strong brand, you basically push that brand message out to people and they will instinctively buy into it because there aren't just that many options out there, right? So whether you're a beverage brand or you're a CPG or whatever it is, as long as you just like quote unquote brought your brand to life, you could basically push that down people's throats essentially. I think in today's environment, even with the way that I hear a lot of the way the younger generation is talking about things, they don't actually feel the need to buy into the idea of a brand or a branded item as much as previous generations. And so I find that a lot of the companies that are winning are actually building a product around their tastes and needs. And then the brand comes almost second, as opposed to it being brand led. Now, that doesn't mean I don't believe in brand marketing. I don't think things should be brand led. I still do. But I just think the context is a little bit different, where they don't just buy into the brand for the sake of the brand. There has to be more behind that. And that's where it's really interesting to see the brands that are quote unquote winning.
So, Nick, I love what you mentioned when you were in your role at TikTok as a CMO there. You realized that things had to change. I actually feel like that moment is happening across so many of the brand leaders that we work with. It's like, oh, hey, like I was at P&G and like I was the top of my class, and we grew this brand from X to Y, and and then I did this 17 times, and then I woke up one day and like that formula didn't work anymore. That's kind of where we are, right? It's been happening for probably 2 years, but people are actually feeling the pain now. Maybe it was like, oh, we had a bad year. Like, oh, this product launch didn't go the way it should have because of X, Y, Z. And now they're like, no, actually the landscape has changed in that playbook of, the how brands grow, Byron Sharp, like laws of growth type of thing. Like it just doesn't work the way that it used to. And there are several factors as to why, both from, the changing media landscape and social platform algorithm changes, which have like a pretty profound impact on what people see. And also like the way that the retailers have sort of reorganized themselves with both private label, this more focus on starter brands, but most importantly, because consumers don't buy into that message the same way that previous generations have just been like, okay, I heard this ad 15 times. I'm going to sign up for this insurance company or this phone. And that's kind of like the root of what's driving all of it. But I think that this moment, people are actually waking up. And I have also seen your posts on LinkedIn. We've worked together in a professional capacity, but in a friendly capacity. And I feel like your dream of being a professor is kind of like playing out on LinkedIn as you're giving, your takes on like why this was a good piece by Uber, or, why you like certain like emerging brands. Talk to us a little bit about how, why are you doing that?
Why am I posting so much?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's actually right in line with what you just said. So you know how like a stand-up comedian, they will try and test out all of their jokes in like small clubs before they do their big Netflix special. So for me, my quote unquote Netflix special will be in a classroom teaching one day. But I don't want to have like the material not land or not feel like it's just on point. So I really find LinkedIn to be a fun place where I'll throw out a take, and I don't mind if people disagree or if they think have a different approach or they want to have a deeper discussion on it. And a few people have actually hit me in DMs and said, hey, this was a really interesting post. Can we go deeper on it? I'll typically say yes, and then I'll have that conversation with them because it'll help me refine that thought or that case study or that point, so that if I one day deliver that idea or that concept in a classroom, I'll know that it's been tested by the community at large, which is how I think now, taking it back to marketing, that's how marketing should be, right? You shouldn't think that you have the perfect script or the perfect campaign and then you shove it out there into the world. You should really take this approach of testing it out, seeing what resonates, seeing what sticks. And for the things that stick the most and the things that seem to have a lot of relevance, you then amplify that in the same way that I'm going to take that and now make that a bigger part of my lectures in the future when I have a class.
This is sounding a darn lot like the Vayner volume model, and I like it, which is Vayner sort of philosophy.
Oh, I know what the Vayner volume model is, and it's genius. Yeah, absolutely.
For our community, who we don't talk too much about that here, but this very similar to what Nick's sharing of testing something on social, and some posts probably do great. You probably get some that have 100,000 impressions, some that have like 1,000 impressions, and you probably understand the formula of something a little controversial. Actually, it's good to have some people commenting that they disagree and they don't like it, or did you read this other piece, Nick? That then kind of sparks even more virality for the post, amplifying the reach of it.
Yeah. And I think the approach that you all take to social is, in my mind, the only way that it could work, because there isn't this assumption that the person at the top knows exactly what's the right creative and what's going to resonate. You use that model to test all these different things, because I won't know whether it's a LinkedIn post or a TikTok or an Instagram video. Like, I have no idea what's going to perform. And it's surprising to me sometimes when I post something on LinkedIn specifically, I'll assume this is going to do really well, and it just like tanks. And then there's something that I'll throw out there as like a quick hot take that I didn't even really think twice about, and it'll get, hundreds of thousands of impressions. And that's where I feel that no one has the right answer, but the community will tell you. So you might as well just put it out there and then get that feedback and then run it from there. So like, yeah, it's a really strong model for
Which is
social.
basically what posting on TikTok was like back in the day.
Well, I mean, not even back in the day, it still is. That's
Right.
literally what it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
without a doubt. And not only TikTok, it's how Instagram Reels is being optimized.
Yes.
It's how YouTube Shorts is being optimized. It's how like Facebook Reels. It's all of them optimizing towards this whole thing that we were building at TikTok and how that's really influenced the way that people consume content.
I will say, Nick, I taught a class on the history of media and propaganda for 7 years.
Oh, wow.
Which was fantastic. And I always thought in the same way that you're doing it, of like, I want to get my syllabus correct. I want to make sure that every year, and I just rinse and repeat. And then every year I'm like, no, I got to throw half of this out, because I got like all the things I've now thought in the last year, primarily from the conversations with the students, it was like, you're always optimizing. So I love the approach, because I do think people think this stuff is easy, and it's just not.
It's only easy if you don't want to do really well at it, right? If you want to do well, it's hard. So
Yeah. I want to jump into your time at TikTok, because I do think you were there at this key moment. I remember one of the agencies that I was with, we were also, TikTok was a client of ours right during the beginning of the pandemic. So we had to do all this virtual event stuff with you. And I think that's where I maybe first met you.
yeah,
But it was this like thing to watch. I remember, I think at the time there was like 60 US employees or something, it was like very
Yeah.
early in, and now that's been explosively grown out. But it was also at a time where the brand started to really just become in the zeitgeist. This was the hot brand.
Yeah.
And seeing scale happen the way that it did, seeing the exponential growth, seeing all these creators come in, seeing all these rules of social that I felt got completely blown out of the water, of how
Yeah.
polished things need to be. And suddenly there's a guy making a sandwich and he's getting 3 million views every single time. What was it like to be there in the beginning of this real shift in the creator economy? And how did you then use that as a marketing tactic?
Yeah, that's a fun question. It's often nice to reflect back on the early moments at TikTok, because it was just such a fun time in my career. So a couple things that really stuck out during that time. One, everyone presumed that we were a social media platform, right? And I think the big nuance was when we were looking at understanding the brand when I first joined, the assumption was that we're a social media platform, you're gaining followers, you're having these connections, and that's what really mattered. It was really nuanced when we found that the verb that everybody used to talk about their engagement on social was the verb check. So like, I check Twitter, I check Instagram, I check Facebook. But then people started using the verb watch when they talked about TikTok. That nuance put us down this path from a brand brand perspective, that we couldn't be a social platform, because a social platform is about the connections you have with people and that you want to check up on them, literally like check on them. The idea of like what Watch was, it positioned us more as an entertainment platform. And that shift really like changed our approach to how we did marketing, how we built out the product, how we thought about gaining influencers, in the same way that studios built out a roster of like actors and actresses. It really like reframed how we needed to move forward in order to like win in a category that people didn't even realize we're playing in until it was almost too late, right? Because the other crazy insight that we found is that people tend to only have, on average in the US, 3 social media apps on their phone, because they feel an obligation to contribute to the social media quote unquote community, whether it's like posts or whether it's adding pictures or whether it's like, dropping tweets or whatever it might be. But when it came to entertainment apps, as long as people were feeling entertained, they were happy to download more apps. So it also created this opportunity for us to compete in a place that had more white space and also had higher engagement times, because people will spend upwards of 3 to 4 hours a day on entertainment, but only like 30 to 60 minutes on social media. So all those things helped push us down this path to accelerate that growth by repositioning and reframing what the app was for people, which also pushed us to grow and age up, because social media is really used by like a younger audience, but entertainment's used by all ages. So all those things helped us, really think about the strategy, the approach, what was prioritized, and how we really grew the app in the early days.
Are there any battle stories? I guess I'm thinking about like, was it the Weeknd who did that like live in game game engine concert? Like, there was a lot of really fun stuff in those early days that I felt like you guys were trying. I know you even dabbled in NFTs. Like, there's a lot of like early fun experiments. And I guess how did you utilize those as a way to grow the network as well?
Oh my gosh, there's so many stories. When we first launched TikTok Live, there was an emphasis around how do we work with like musicians, because the platform was inherently like music driven. So you're referencing like the live with The Weeknd, which is like the concert that we did for the first time, which was a pretty big production and pretty exciting. That didn't really have any significant challenges though. So as far as like battle stories, I mean, Gary V did the first TikTok live that included live donations. And that was like a 12-hour live stream where we had like 80 different guests, and ultimately they raised a little over $2 million for the All In Challenge.
ALS.
Yeah. And so like that to me was like a really fun one because we were trying to figure it all out on the fly. Another one that I thought was really fun was we launched this thing called TikTok Kitchens. And it was this idea that there were so many food trends that were popping up at the platform and encouraging people, especially during lockdown, to go and make it at their home, like baked feta cheese pasta, as an example. The idea for Kitchens came about because I got a phone call on my personal cell phone, and the person on the other line was, I forget where they were from, but they were not from anywhere near where I was from. But I saw like an area code that I didn't recognize. I picked it up, and the person on the other line literally said, "Are you Nick Tran from TikTok?" And at first I was like, yes. I didn't like, I was hesitant to answer that. I was
Nick,
like,
we
yes.
got to get you set up with a spam filter, but it
I
continues.
know.
We need a burner, Nick.
I know. But then the person then said, "Okay, great. I need you to turn off all the baked feta cheese pasta videos." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And turns out this individual was part of this like group that supplies and produces all the feta cheese that gets distributed to restaurants and grocery stores throughout the United States. And so then I was blown away. I was like, "Give me more context." And he said, "We're about to run out. And I heard from some folks that the reason why we're running out of feta cheese is because of this trend that popped up on TikTok. And I needed to figure out how to like turn that off because we won't have enough supply to supply the grocery stores or the restaurants in like the next like 2 weeks." And I was like, "That's incredible, but I have no way of actually turning that off. So sorry, but there's nothing we can do." He obviously said like, "Okay, I thought I'd try." It then struck me that TikTok as an entity wasn't really gaining anything from the virality of this thing. The suppliers were like selling out of stuff, the grocery stores and all these other people were gaining from it. So we then developed this pilot to have TikTok Kitchens where all the top trending items that are on the platform would then be featured as if it were a restaurant on like, DoorDash or Postmates or, Uber Eats, whatever it is. And the hope is that you go to TikTok Kitchens, you see the top trending items, and when you buy it, you then are able to order it and have it delivered to your doorstep in an hour. And the reason why we were really pushing that at the time is because during COVID, a lot of the restaurants, especially local restaurants, they were starting to like have to close down because they didn't have obviously any like traffic. So we created this network where we had about 30,000 local restaurants that were part of this group, and they were going to fulfill that. So it was the hope of like keeping these local restaurants open, having it supply these TikTok trends, and then like obviously like bringing to life a little bit something more tangible than just like the video. So that's another example of something that was like really fun and exciting. But again, there's a lot of these types of stories because during that era of TikTok, we were innovating, we were pushing things through, and my whole idea at the time was, how do we just create more touch points and engage in like more moments of people's lives rather than just the moments they're staring at their screen.
Before we leave TikTok, I don't know if you want to phrase this differently, but I also think that brands in the beginning didn't know what to do, right? They were used to doing high produced stuff. And I think about, when we spoke to, was it like Corey from Elf or Craig Bromers from American Eagle. And then he would talk about, I did this deal with Addison Rae, and suddenly every store is sold out of this specific jean. Was that something that was a surprise, or is that sort of like, no, we knew that these things were going to drive these mega trends?
There's a lot of nuance to that. I'll speak to the one that you brought up as an example, but that one I could have predicted easily. But it was because, do you remember earlier during like YouTube's growth, the rise of like the YouTube creators and influencers?
Like the makeup influencers, like the Michelle fan who
Yes,
just like sold out everything.
Yes. So you had precedent for that, but the real issue that I found that was a challenge for us early days of TikTok was that there were very few quote unquote YouTubers, and I'm distinguishing YouTubers from people that were discovered on YouTube. So like a Justin Bieber's example was discovered on YouTube, but he wasn't a YouTuber, right? There were very few YouTubers that broke into the mainstream of like pop culture and then became either like musicians or actors or actresses. And that idea of gaining that level of fame was still separating like the quote unquote A-list Hollywood type from like the social media influencer type. So what we were really trying to do earlier on was break that stigma and elevate a few actual TikTok creators into that realm. So I don't know if you ever saw this film, and like, not a big deal if you haven't, but if you go on Netflix, you can watch a movie called He's All That, which is almost like the sequel to She's All That. And it stars Addison Rae. Something that most people might not take notice of is that we executive produced that, as in like TikTok. And we wanted to make sure that we provided a platform to elevate some of the best creators on the platform to then reach that status that made people feel like they were now mainstream and cutting through culture and breaking through. So whether it was like pushing Addison or helping other creators on the platform get to that level, it then turns it from being a social media influencer that's endorsing American Eagle to becoming like Addison Rae, the actual, celebrity, is now promoting American Eagle, which I think resonates a lot more with that younger audience at that time, because for the younger folks, they wanted to look into that social media influencer, but then for the parents, they wanted to buy something and have that had value, and they saw more value when it was from a Hollywood type versus it being from a social media person. So I could have predicted that fairly early, but there's a lot of other examples of brands that didn't necessarily use a creator, but just had a breakout viral moment on the platform, and that escalated their sales to, exponential realms. Elf being a great example, but also other ones in that category like Glow Recipe, or I'm trying to think of other beverage like Liquid Death. Like there's a bunch of examples of brands that just broke out on TikTok and social and have done very well without using, celebrities or influencers.
I like that tie you just made to the celebrities and influencers, because I feel like that gets to a kind of common thread in your career, Nick, just in media and tech and entertainment, whether that's Samsung or Hulu. A lot of it is, this sort of similar idea, right? And like the distribution channel might be a bit different. But the idea of sort of like a talent that can go across different mediums is something that's important, whether you're talking about mobile or you're talking about, connected TV, or you're talking about TikTok. I would argue a lot of these TikTok stars, and I would call them social stars.
Yep.
I mean, we're putting them in Super Bowl commercials. They're not social stars anymore. Like, is Mr. Beast a YouTuber anymore? No, he's an American magnet. Like,
yeah, he has the number one show on Amazon Prime. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So these people who might start off as social stars really become the next generation, just stars, period.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get your take on that, sort of for talent discovery. As you think about like the talents who are really breaking through today, where do you see them starting and going?
It's more about, I guess, their discovery, because a lot of people still start in the same fashion and they still want to end up in the same place. But like your point on like how are they discovered is so interesting, because what I find is that you don't need to necessarily be the first to discover them anymore. Whereas I feel like it used to be a big rat race for big talent agencies to find the next, upcoming star and then sign them and then lock them into all these deals and then see how they pan out. To the same, analogy that you have, and why I think like things like VVM, the Vayner volume model, it makes so much sense. It applies to talent as well, right? So you could have folks that you think, have an opportunity to be successful across whatever category or industry you want. And then you put out their content, whether it's singing, whether it's acting, whether it's like some other talented element. And if the community reacts positively towards that content, there's a big chance that that will translate to more engagement, more minutes watched, and so on and so forth. That will then dictate whether they'll be a viable star, quote unquote, across whatever category you're trying to do. Like Mr. Beast, as an example, he has completely figured out how to like hack YouTube and just drive engagement through his video content. It didn't require anyone like famous or initially well-known. It didn't require someone who was great at acting or anyone that had
He's not even like that objectively handsome. Like, he's just like a dude.
Tell his fiance that. I'm totally kidding. No, but yes, I do think that like you've created an opportunity where a few elite people sort of like on the throne of Hollywood culture aren't selecting this is the next person that's going to become that thing. You're literally letting people tell you this person, whether it's like Speed or whether it's Kai Cenat or whether it's like Mr. Beast, they are the most fun to watch, and therefore I'll spend my time / like their currency, which is their time, to like watch this versus watching something else. And so I don't think the idea of needing to go and discover that next person is as important as it used to be, because now you can just like identify them once they started to become popular. Now, of course, it'll be a little bit of a rat race. Like, are you going to get to them before someone else does? But there's enough of them, and there's so many talented people, and there's so many more people that are getting discovered because the the limiting factor isn't who can produce the best thing. It's like who has a phone and who has an idea. And because there's so many people making content, there's enough amazing, talented people in the world that I think, it'll be a much different landscape than it was 10 years ago.
I love that. And I want to fast follow because you've also been a pioneer into many different things. You were giving some examples of that in your time at TikTok, but I feel like that's also a sort of like Nick Tran DNA is always being the first to various things, whether that might be, your interest in emerging tech or in crypto or in emerging talent. How do you think that marketing leaders right now are thinking about that sort of like next generation of consumer engagement? Do you think they're still like hungover from the 2021 era, or you think they're like sort of jumping back in? Like, what's your take?
It's always cyclical, right? So I won't say who it was. I won't say the place because I think it'll be too obvious, but I was applying for a job, and in the interview, the CMO at the time asked me a question that still strikes me as being odd to this day, but he said, "What are your thoughts on Google?" And I thought that was like a really odd question. I was like, "Oh," and this was like not at a time when Google was just starting. Like I started my career in like 2011, 2012. So Google was by definition like a big deal. I remember saying like, "Oh, what do you mean? What's my thought on Google? Like, how would we use it?" And he's like, No. Like, do you think Google's going to be around in the next few years? I kind of see it as just a fad. And I was like, no, Google will be around for quite some time. And sure enough, 3 months later, he was no longer the CMO. Like he left and someone came in that was a much more progressive individual. So there's always this like balance of when are you like too far on the like cutting edge of technology and culture, and when are you like too far behind? I tend to think that like as a CMO, it's really nuanced to where you have to find this line to where like what's great for your brand and where should you play as a brand. And different brands will have different tolerances at like where they need to play and where they need to be. And if you're a brand that claims to be at the forefront of culture, then you need to play there. And if you're a brand that's there to be a functional utility for people and add value to their lives, then you need to play there. As far as like the pendulum swinging, the whole like NFT craze and then crash, I think opened up people's ideas to, hey, it's great to jump on new technology. It's great to jump on like trends, but like just think about how much you go all in and like what is it that you're doing to like signal like what that is for your company.
But it was
And
also metaverse, right? It wasn't just NFTs. It was
Oh
like
yeah, for sure.
like everyone was like, and it wasn't just a few brands. It was like everyone. We're
Everyone.
in.
Like Facebook changed their name to Meta, right?
Yeah.
And then obviously it's like, hey, just kidding. We're gonna now do this thing. So I think people are more practical. That time during COVID where collectibles were a frenzy, NFTs, metaverse, all were a frenzy. I think it was just like a really interesting snapshot in a moment in like the zeitgeist of culture. I think now we're taking a little bit more of a prudent approach, but still trying to be on the forefront of technology. We've seen everyone talk about AI. I'm more interested not in the fact of like, is AI going to be a thing, but how are people using AI and how are they going to use it in an innovative way to separate themselves from how everyone else is using it? Because yes, it can make life more efficient, but there's going to be use cases that we haven't even thought about now that'll probably dictate how brands win with that in the future. And that will be all, the rage in the next 3 to 5 years, I would imagine.
I think, and that was one of the questions I wanted to ask you, because I think about that Coke commercial that used AI for the holidays, which was terrible. I think about the first like when Coke released the AI generated flavor. I don't know if you guys ever tried it. It was like the most disgusting soft drink I'd ever had. And I was like, did nobody taste these things? And I can't really think of a brand utilizing AI well in a public way. I think a lot of them are using it on the back end tremendously. But like, in your opinion, is there anyone who's using AI effectively well?
I'll give an example, but I don't know if it's like a consistent thing. GoFundMe did an early AI ad that was just a compilation of various images, and it told like a beautiful story about communities coming together to help each other. That was like a much earlier version of using AI than what like Coke did. But at the same time, like I don't want to take any like criticism of Coke lightly, because in my mind, if the brands don't take those risks and put things out there into like the world to be consumed and to be like looked at and get that feedback, we wouldn't be able to push marketing as far as we otherwise would. So part of me is like, would I be excited about that ad? I don't know. I wasn't in there. I don't know what their goals were and what their objective was. But like, did it push the idea of using AI for creative forward in a meaningful way? Yeah, I think so. And then like everyone obviously talks about Jaguar, and that was like a huge like discussion point at one point. I also feel that like Jaguar knows they had to like shake things up. Now, would I personally have done it the way that they did it? Probably not. Do I think that there were other ways? Yes, there were. But like I also feel like we should celebrate even like misses or like things that don't pan out exactly the way that, we would want, because that's the only way that we could push the industry forward.
Yeah, I share your perspective on Jaguar because like the fact that we even brought up Jaguar on this podcast is like means it's top of mind. It's relevant. Like
Yeah.
I've thought about Jaguar a lot more in the past 3 months than I have in the past several
30
years.
years.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I would probably be a person they'd want to buy that kind of a car. So while the execution certainly got a lot of tomatoes thrown at it, I do think that like if their goal was to drive relevance with people who are in market to consider buying their cars in a slightly younger demographic, like they did it. Nick, on that sort of AI piece, I think your take is well heard. And Sam, I think what we hear a lot on like marketers trying to figure out how to crack it for efficiency. I don't think that that might be things like automated emails or chatbots or compilations. Nick mentioned the GoFundMe thing. I think Carvana did a nice like kind of a Mad Lib personalized thing. I think that novelty phase is kind of over where people are like, I can figure this out with ChatGPT. And consumers are at this point of like so much disinformation, what's going on right now with Meta's content moderation. It's a really tricky time as a brand to be putting out things that are like not human produced and being like clear about it. So while the capability exists, I think people aren't necessarily turning it on fully just because it's such a unique moment in time.
I just want to play the other side of this for a second because I'm going to be critical because that's just my nature. But I remember, and I think it was PwC who like put together OpenAI and Coke and like did their own press release. Like it was such a consultant thing of like, you have to do this together. And it was some $50 million, relationship at the time or whatever it was.
Totally.
And I think that to me does not mean that a brand marketer's job is still not to put out great storytelling. And I think that a lot of brands, and we see this across innovation all the time, where someone is like, hey, I did an innovative thing because I want to be seen as innovative, not because the thing is good. And I think that's where AI to me has gone like, oh, it helps our market cap to be seen as a forward-thinking company. So therefore we're going to say we're in the AI business, not because it does more than that. And I think that I just think we're better than that as marketers. And I think that we know that the connective tissue of storytelling and how virality works and how people get, start the word of mouth, all of that is something that I think is such a human one-to-one experience that the more we insert automation and computers in, the more we potentially take away from our ability to do that well. And that's, I think, the miss from Coke. Coke is such a human brand, right? And so that's where I just think that like it doesn't help them. But continue what you were going to say, Avery.
So the other thing I was thinking about is, and as all these brands try to uncover how they can leverage AI to their benefit, a couple brands will win by going the opposite route, right? Like they will strip everything down. They'll keep it super raw. They won't be using anything AI related, and they'll bring like human experiences in real life back and make that a thing. Or it might be just like, as simple as like billboards. I have no idea what it is, but like it could be something that's almost the opposite of AI. And I think all that will just show that as everyone goes one direction, a few marketers will find, some diamonds in the rough of what's left behind, and then figure out how to make that really fun and exciting and engaging.
Predictably, Nick is right on the money. We have two briefs that are exactly that. That's how do we lean into the IRL luxury of reality, like literally like newspapers, things like that, that kind of go in the opposite direction because people are also almost like craving something like tactile in person, in this world where everything's like AI automated, supercomputer. So I think we're going to see a lot of that this year.
It happens all the time. These are the general patterns and behaviors that we see across all new innovations. So I'm again, not surprised, but also excited for how things continue to evolve.
So Nick, what is Professor Nick, I should say? I feel like you've been giving a lot of good professor takes during this chat. What do you think is like going to be the big thing that marketers are paying attention to in 2025? Is that new emerging technology? Is it more AI? Is it something almost like counter to what we've seen the last few years?
Part of me believes that, I don't know if this isn't necessarily the right thing that I think should happen, but like if there's more pressure for companies to show ROI, and like if macro trends kind of show that like there might be a little bit of a pullback in spend, I definitely see happen, early in my career, this like remit to the CMOs to really justify all the activity and kind of like go back to more of that like quant driven approach to like proving out everything. Someone once asked me, how should we look at that when we talk to our CFO? And my push was, let's say you have a kid and you want your kid to eat healthy. So you give them a little bit of broccoli and it turns out that broccoli is good for them. Do you then decide that like they're only going to eat broccoli from that point on? Like, no, that's crazy. But like marketers do that for their companies and brands all the time because the CFO is saying like, hey, this thing that you spent on did really well. Let's just focus all of our spend there.
Let's just go all in on retargeting.
Let's just go all in on retargeting. Like, let's ignore everything else. And like that has happened in these times where like budgets get tighter and all these like things happen. The companies that will win will like take the approach and say like, okay, while other companies are tightening their belt and doing all like retargeting or whatever shows like a quote unquote proven ROI, if we just invest more on a more balanced approach to doing brand and doing like organic social and doing some of this and doing some of that and doing some like real life experiences, and let's throw something like, as long as they can do that in a way that doesn't just become white noise, but they do that strategically and effectively, I think they'll see a lot more growth than the brands that are going to be asked to like pull back and just focus on the things that they can show a definitive ROI on. So on one hand, I think the constraints of budget tend to create really fun opportunities for marketers to be more creative. So as the budgets get tighter, I think we might actually see more creativity in the next like year or two than we might have if like things were going really well and people were spending on big Super Bowl ads with big celebrities, I would say.
Amazing.
I like that year of scrappiness. I feel that too. I think that like this is just going to be a year when people are a little bit tighter. You mentioned organic social. I think that people are really waking up to that. We just did a really cool piece of research with Ipsos that actually surveyed a bunch of marketing leaders. I will send it to you both and make it available for Gen Z listeners, of course. And I think that's a big theme of like perceived ROI of organic social is actually still the biggest barrier. And people invest a lot of like paid media behind it, but then none on organic. It's just this like really weird thing where they're like, okay, we're going to spend 40 million on paid and 400K on the organic creative for it. And you're like, well, if you spent 2 million on the organic part, then your ads would actually work a lot harder. And you'd be shocked. You wouldn't be shocked. Many of our listeners would be shocked how foreign of a conversation that is.
Yeah. But like, I also see this weird nuance where, again, there was an era where management consultants and COOs became the CEOs. And sure enough, over the last, few months, you're seeing those folks become replaced with like former marketers and CMOs who now become CEOs. So as those folks take the helm and like set the strategic direction for the company, hopefully you'll see a little bit less of what you just described, that surprise, and a little bit more of the confidence in what building a brand can actually do and how it'll actually be enabled through things like organic social versus just like paying for it. So yeah, I think that to me, like I always relate everything back to our relationships. I think that's a great way to like break things down, especially in marketing. Do I want a friend that I have to like take out to lunch and pay for their lunch and their dinners every time just to hang out with me? Or do I want a friend that genuinely just wants to hang out? It's sort of like, do you want someone that watches your stuff because they just want to watch your stuff? Or do you want to like have someone watch it because you forced it and you paid money to make sure they watched it? Like, it just doesn't make sense to me intuitively.
All right, Nick, before we go, my final question to you is, you just talked about relationships. How did you end up as a producer on the Kanye West Genius documentary?
Oh, that's actually about relationships. So I was at, I want to say like whatever Patow Next was called before it was Patow Next. It was like
Patow Worlds.
Oh, it was Worlds. Yes. Yeah. So I was at Worlds, and Cootie and Chike happened to be at Worlds as well. And I think it was like Baron Davis had talked to them and said, hey, do you know Nick Tran? You should go talk to him about this thing that you have. And then Peter Pham also told them like, hey, you should talk to Nick. And this is when I was at Hulu. And a few other folks had said like, hey, if you want to like figure out how to make this thing come to life, talk to Nick. The ironic thing is when they told me to meet with Cootie and Chike, nobody told me what they were working on. All they said was like, would you meet these two like aspiring film folks? And I was like, yeah, of course. So they come to the office when I was at Hulu, and Cootie opens up his backpack and has this like hard drive and like plugs it into his laptop and says like, do you mind if I show you something? And I was like, yeah, of course, show me. Again, I had no idea what it was at the time. He then starts playing this early footage of Kanye outside of his first house with his mom, which ended up being in the film. And I immediately like said, wait, what is this? And he told me like, oh, I've been filming Kanye for like the last 20 something years. And then I was obviously like jaw on the floor. I had no idea what like we had. I was like kind of freaking out a little bit. I was like, hold that thought. I ran out and I got our CEO and I told him like, they have this footage and we just lost at the time, like the Billie Eilish documentary. So I was like really eager to try to get something like at that level. And he was very excited about it. But at the end of the day, we went to our head of unscripted and they just didn't see the opportunity for Hulu to like take on that project and like bring that into like the Hulu library of things. So they ultimately passed. So as soon as they passed formally, I immediately like told Kuti and Chike as they're like walking to the elevator, give me 4 hours. And so then they said, okay. I then like go to the CEO and I said, if Hulu formally passes on this documentary, is it okay if I work on it and do it personally? And he said, his name's Randy, but he said like, of course, if we pass on it formally, you can do whatever you want. Good luck. I then immediately call Peter, Ross Martin, and Kern and ultimately say like, there's a film that needs to be like produced. The footage is all there. Could we put together like a small amount of money to help them get this across the finish line? And obviously they all said, absolutely, whatever you want to do, we're in. So I put together this like small ragtag crew that had zero experience in doing this before. We basically like helped Kuti and Chike finish the film, help them with the finances to go through editing, and then ultimately finish the project. And then we ended up selling it to Netflix. And it became like one of the coolest, most fun opportunities that I've had a chance to be a part of, but also just a great way to meet some amazing human beings and like Kuti and Chike, and like the stuff that they've been able to like continue to bring to the table and bring to life has just been so much fun to see. So yeah, very lucky, great time, great place. And obviously like luckily had the network that was able to pull it all together.
What an incredible story and perfect way to put a bow on this conversation. Nick, thank you for joining us, for sharing your wisdom. So many little case studies in this conversation. So I know Gen Z will have really enjoyed it as well.
Amazing. Thank you.
Appreciate the time.
Yeah. Good seeing you both. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Nick.